Well, I was at work. At the time, I was working at University of Colorado, and of course, it happened right around noon. I was getting ready to walk home to lunch, and lived right off campus. And as I walked, there were people out in their front yards, stunned by the news. Of course,
Yeah.
it stunned everybody, and then proceeded to watch it on television throughout the weekend, and it was probably one of the most devastating events in the history of our country, I'd say.
Uh, Now in the paper the other day, I noticed that we have a budget now of somewhere around 27 million.
Wow.
We had at that time about 15,000 people, and of course now we got almost 10 times that much. And it's hard to believe that everything you see on this side of 75 was built after that time.
Wow.
At that time, we didn't have anything west of Highway 75. Grave Street was about the west line of the city of McKinney. And at that time, I lived out on North Morris Street.
What do you think what was the most significant event in your time of being a mayor?
Oh, I don't know, it was, I suppose it was a change of government in the city of McKinney, because we had been that mayor commissioner type for so long, and my father was mayor in 1922, and then I was in 60.
1960. What about like when JFK, when he was assassinated, did you have any, did that cause any ruckus in McKinney or?
When I was in Rotary Club at the time, and we were in a meeting in a Rotary Club meeting at the First Christian Church, and they came in and announced the fact that the president had been assassinated. It was, it's funny that different things, you remember the dates and things like that happened on that date. And that's one of the things that I remember in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
And it basically demonstrated the technology and the strength of the country. That was something that is and was and is still very important, I think, in our lives.
Yeah.
I would say the divisiveness is happening, and people are basically being pitted against each other, religions and races and so forth, and a lot of that is I feel is political, and is really not something that we should be dwelling on. There's a lot of things we need to straighten out, basically, in this country.
Yeah.
I remember watching Kennedy and Nixon's presidential debate on television. From what I hear, this was the first time there was a presidential debate that was televised.
Yeah.
That I remember because I was going to school in Berkeley, California, and we had a small television on the second floor, and I went to see. The only thing I remember about that debate is that Kennedy was pretty sure that Nixon was a little kind of, I don't know, nervous or a little uncomfortable. And that's about it. I think, of course, I can't remember what they talked about. I can't remember what they talked about in the last presidential debate. But that's the only thing I remember, that Kennedy seems to be sure of himself, but that Nixon was kind of unsettled.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing. The rest of them, I think, they have told you, what everybody, that when he was assassinated and when he was thrown. I met my wife in 1960 in Berkeley. We got married in 1961. if we be honest, that is the most important in 60.
Yeah.
Now, I worked at a Navy base in the 1960s
Okay.
and was there I worked security, so there was a lot going on with the astronauts at that time. And this was a base where every astronaut had to be at a base when one of them went up. And so this was at Point Arguello in California. And, there's just a lot going on. And the Bay of Pigs, and everything that happened, I was there for in the 60s. So it was a closed base where nobody could go on unless they had a special badge.
Wow.
And I did meet John Glenn. There were other astronauts there, but we weren't allowed to fraternize with any of them. But it was an interesting time. And I remember all of the things that usually happened, but like when they walked on the moon, it was a big thing.
Yeah.
Everybody had their TV on,
Yeah.
and everybody had a party, and we're watching them. It was a good time. This is one small step for man, one large step for mankind, I
Yeah.
believe is the way.
Yeah, something like that.
Something to
Yeah,
that in
yeah.
that order. But my husband was working for the federal government at that time in California, and so I took a job with him too.
Cool.
And it was there was just so much that happened every day. Something would happen, and I was able to be kind of in on it, but not. I just helped issue badges and get things like that. Get their, but it was very, very tight. Nobody was there allowed to be on base unless they had proper ID and a reason to be there. This was when an astronaut went up. There was always, they had places all over the world that they tracked them, because at that time tracking was not done too well like it is today. But and that's how we got to know some of the astronauts and some of the people that were going up. But it was an interesting time. And in the 1960s, I mean, I was so young that I didn't know what was happening half the time. But my husband knew a lot of the astronauts because he was in the Navy Reserve and worked as a pilot with the pilots and things. And so he got to know quite a few of them personally. I didn't get to, except for John Glenn. He's the only one I met. My son was born in 1961, so we didn't go to many movies, or we didn't have the money to go. And you just made your own entertainment, actually. If you had a TV set, you're good. But no, there's a lot going on that people just don't realize. And when they shut down a base, boy, they shut it down.
Yeah.
And actually Point Arguello is on the ocean side, and Vandenberg Air Force Base was on the inside. And the first time when we moved there, we were living in Arizona, and we moved for his job. And one night I went to bed with my little son was in the next bedroom, and the windows started shaking, and the whole thing, I mean, it was just like, I thought, this is an earthquake? I don't know what this is.
Wow.
And it got louder and louder and louder, and I came to find out the next morning, I found out they had shot a missile off.
Wow.
And so Vandenberg Air Force Base is where they did all the missiles going in one orbit. And then in Florida, where if they went up, they went in a different orbit, so that they would never hit each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they also burned up a lot of of those because most of them were blown up over the ocean
Yeah.
because they weren't perfect yet.
Yeah.
They were just starting the missile program there. Now, kids are too privileged. Really, the attitude of being a parent changed drastically. And the parents want to be their friends, and they can't be. They've got to be parents only. And that's because that's how the children learn. So, and I am blessed to have 3 children who all gone to college. They've all got good jobs, responsible people. I am so proud of them. And it's really difficult in this day and age to raise your children properly. There's too many influences.
Yeah.
Too many. And you really need to just kind of learn what you can learn, put it into practice, and always help somebody.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, somebody will need your help. So,
Well, according to the Constitution, that is the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so he was vice president, and he was also in the motorcade going down, so he was a logical person to be inaugurated
Yeah.
on the spot, because that left the United States without any leadership. So, however, prior to that, there was conflict between Johnson and Kennedy's family, off and on. And I think it was just kind of a man thing, that one was trying to outdo the other. Lyndon Johnson was very popular in the Senate, and he had a lot of friends, and JFK was the new boy on the block. And so there was that conflict. But Lyndon Johnson was for America. He wanted to have the continuity because we had the Russians in the Cold War on
Yeah.
one side,
Yeah.
and so he was trying to keep things peaceful. So that's,
Okay.
and he also was in his own territory at the time, and he was able to get the judge to put him on as president. I was a young mother at the time, and because of that, I was very busy being a young mother. I had 3 children under 5, and so between diapers and feeding them and taking them to the doctor and all the things that you do as a young mother, I really didn't have time to absorb it. But I had many friends who had their spouses or brothers or so forth in the Vietnam War, so I did keep up with their opinions, but it really did not affect me as far as being concerned for the war. I didn't get it. I was too busy with another responsibility. So,
Awesome.
well, it's new for the United States to have such a totally diversified population. A lot of unknowns, a lot of religious unknowns, a lot of political unknowns, and I think that we haven't had a chance to absorb it as a living thing over years. It's so new. I think the press does a lot of fearful things that we take, and so we continue to have something dangling in front of us saying, be careful, watch what you're doing, you know. Did you know him? Did you know her?
Yeah.
And doesn't give us a chance to absorb those people and get to know them, because they're humans. They're human beings, and being human beings, they all have their own cultures, their families. Everything is important to them, and if we don't know why, it's hard to be friendly.
I was not drafted to go to Vietnam, and I wasn't very political at that time. But I do think that the war in Vietnam was a big mistake, and many Americans lost their lives. About 50,000 soldiers, I think, lost their lives, and the war wasn't necessary for our national security. I was in college, and I remember being in a dormitory,
Yeah.
being when he was shot.
What do you think about that?
Well, I was shocked. I mean, I wasn't very involved with politics, but it was quite a surprise.
Yeah.
Well, as a result of his being shot, Lyndon Johnson became president, and he's the one who's mainly responsible for getting us into the war in Vietnam. And he ended up sending about 500,000 soldiers, I think, to Vietnam. Cost, you know, it was a very expensive war. 50,000 soldiers were killed, many more were wounded,
Yeah.
and it wasn't necessary for national security. The civil rights movement, the passing of the voting rights law, and end of desegregation. People who had restaurants were not allowed to refuse to serve black people, and black people could go to motels, and that was a big change.
Yeah.
In the 60s, well, I went to college and I went to graduate school and got a BA, MA, PhD.
There was a lot going on during the 60s.
Yeah.
Of course, I remember the Bay of Pigs, but I think that's been discussed. We were living on the coast of Louisiana, and just overnight, the stores were just completely wiped out from water and food. But what I remember that was so interesting and sad was when John F. Kennedy was shot. My son he was a baby, and he had an ear infection, and I took him to the ENT there, Dr. Lee J. Saunier, and in Lafayette, and he excuse me, he was in the room, and somebody came and told us that they had just heard it, and he said, "Arnetta, he won't live." And sure enough, before I left that day, they had announced, I think, that he had died. And so that was something that was very shocking and very, hard to believe that it happened in your own state.
Yeah.
Because I'm from here.
Yes. Could you tell us?
Well, it's just that everybody was really concerned and frightened that, we were really going to get into a war. And we were living on the coast there in Lafayette, Louisiana, also, when both of these happened. And so that was, when people heard about it, the stores were just completely wiped out of groceries and of water. And medical things, anything that they thought they might need. And it was just like everything was bare in the stores, no matter what it was.
Yeah.
So I sure do. Our schools, our textbooks, with the things that they have in them. We were in a group in the 70s from Dallas-Fort Worth that were involved in the Texas textbooks, and we didn't like what our children were being taught in the schools. So a group of us got together and we went to the Texas Board of Education and told them about some of the things in the textbooks and had the textbooks with us. But that didn't seem to make any difference because things have continually gotten worse through the years. But I guess there were 50 of us at least, husbands and wives in a lot of cases, not just mothers or fathers. But they listened very nicely. But when the time came for the selection of the new textbooks, there was nothing really done about it. So it's been going downhill. For one thing, it talked about George Washington very briefly and talked really against George Washington. One thing, they said he died of venereal disease, and that was not true. Another thing, that they gave more information about Marilyn Monroe than they did George Washington or any of our presidents or any of our generals or anything that would be historical for children to read. And the books that were chosen in high school were books that we didn't approve of.
Yeah.
One was God's Little Acre. They had Catchers in the Rye, and we felt that there were better things that they could be studying and reading and giving reports on. Right now I can't think of all of them,
That's all right.
but there were a number that we had a list of what these were required readings, and they didn't have a choice. So we, as a group of parents, went to the school board about that. So we were quite active in the school system, and we got very little help. In fact, I was asked, a couple of us were asked to not be bothering them at school and sitting in on the classes so much. So, you know, things we didn't mind. We were naughty. We went ahead, sat in on the classes. And the school that my children went to, they graduated from Trinity High School in Euless. And the principal happened to be somebody from Van Alstyne that my family knew. But anyway, it was, since I'm from McKinney originally, and so anyway, it was interesting to have his reaction to somebody that you knew.
Yeah.
So
All right.
basically it was up to the school board, I think, and to take care of what they were told to take care of, and the teachers had to comply.
I was in San Antonio attending a principal's workshop. I was, at the present time, I was a principal in Amarillo, but myself and 3 other people went to San Antonio for the workshop. And while we were there, the day before we left to come back to Amarillo, I had the opportunity of getting to be within just a few feet of John F. Kennedy as he passed down the street in front of the sidewalk where I was. So I got a really good view of him and Jacqueline as well. But the thing that was sad about that, on our way home the next day, we're driving along, the lady, it's the principal's driving the car, and she just turned on the radio to see what was going on, and they were just announcing the assassination of John F. Kennedy. She became physically ill, had to pull off to the side of the road and kind of get her composure back to drive on to Amarillo where we were going. So, and of course, we know all the happenings afterwards as far as his death, his burial, and then of course the taking over of Lyndon Johnson being flown. I still remember seeing him climbing into the airplane in Dallas and flying back to Washington. Of course, he's taking over the presidency since President Kennedy was dead. That's that story of my journey to San Antonio. I think John F. Kennedy opened up a lot of areas. He was very young. In fact, if I remember correctly, probably the youngest president. But it opened up some areas. I think it broke down some barriers since he was Catholic, and a lot of people opposed that. But he turned out to be, I think a good president without prejudices, as well as being a good, innovative president with ideas and such. As far as America's concerned, the breakdown of the home, we don't have mamas and daddies taking care of homes. We've got so much, divorce, separation, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and all of that has greatly affected, I think, our homes in a negative way, and that carries on then as you go to school. boys and little boys and girls and big boys and girls, they carry those experiences, those as such with them to school, and therefore I think the school has had difficulty in dealing with all of that. But it goes back down to the home where these little boys and girls are born and are raised, and the type of home that they have.
You